The spotlight burned white-hot against Marcus Webb's retinas. 300 faces blurred into a single mass of silk and champagne and barely concealed contempt. His mop bucket sat beside the grand piano like evidence of something shameful, water still dripping onto the polished stage floor. The man in the tuxedo, Richard Crane, art critic, cultural arbiter, destroyer of careers, swirled his glass with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Play something for us, janitor. Perhaps Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The laughter rippled through the hall, wave of cruelty dressed up as amusement. Marcus felt his daughter's eyes on him from somewhere in the shadows, 9 years old, and watching her father become smaller with every second. He should have walked away, should have picked up his bucket and disappeared into the service corridors where invisible men belonged. But something cracked inside him, something that had been holding for 9 years, ever since the night Rachel died, with their daughter's first cry still echoing in the delivery room. That crack would change everything. But understanding that moment required going back, required understanding what Marcus Webb had been before grief hollowed him out and left only the shell that pushed a mop across marble floors. 42 hours earlier, Marcus woke to the sound of his daughter screaming. He was out of bed before consciousness fully returned, his body operating on the instinct that had kept them alive through 9 years of solo parenting. Emma's room was dark except for the nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon, her small form thrashing under tangled sheets. Marcus crossed the space in 3 strides and gathered her against his chest, feeling her heart hammer against his ribs. "Just a dream, sweetheart. Just a dream." Her fingers clutched his t-shirt, the fabric worn thin from too many washes in the building's basement laundry room. The apartment was cold. The radiator had been making concerning noises for a week, and Marcus could see his breath in the dim light. February in Brooklyn meant choosing between heat and groceries always won. She was falling again. Emma's voice came out small and broken. "In the dream she was falling, and I couldn't catch her." Marcus rocked slowly, the motion automatic after 9 years. He knew who she was. Rachel appeared in Emma's dreams, sometimes a ghost made of longing and the handful of photographs Marcus had managed to keep. Emma had never met her mother. Rachel had died minutes after the emergency C-section, but somehow the grief had passed through blood and bone into the child's marrow. "I've got you." Marcus pressed his lips to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and the strawberry detangler they bought at the dollar store. "I'll always catch you." The lie tasted familiar on his tongue. He'd been making promises he couldn't keep since the day Emma was born, since the doctor had handed him a squalling infant and told him his wife was gone. Every promise was a prayer sent into the void. "I'll keep you safe, I'll give you everything, I'll be enough." None of it was true, but he kept saying it anyway. Emma's breathing eventually steadied, her grip loosening. Marcus carried her back to bed and tucked the blankets around her small frame. She looked like Rachel, same blonde hair, same delicate features, same stubborn set to her jaw even in sleep. Sometimes it hurt to look at her. Sometimes it was the only thing that didn't hurt. "Dad." "Yeah, sweetheart. Are we going to the thing on Saturday?" Marcus's stomach tightened. The thing. The annual gala for the Ashford Foundation, the biggest arts fundraiser in New York City, where Manhattan's elite gathered to congratulate themselves on caring about culture. Marcus had worked it for 3 years, running part of the maintenance crew that made sure nobody tripped over a loose cable or noticed that the gleaming venue required an army of invisible people to stay gleaming. "I have to work it. You'll stay with Mrs. Patterson." Emma's eyes opened, catching the moonlight. "Can I come with you instead?" Mrs. Patterson's apartment smells like old soup, and she only has one TV channel. Marcus smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "It's not the kind of place for kids, Em. Lots of fancy people doing fancy things." "You mean rich people pretending to care about music while people like us clean up after them?" The observation landed like a punch. 9 years old and already fluent in the language of class warfare. Marcus wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to protect her from the reality that the world was divided into people who mattered and people who mopped up their spills. But Emma had inherited Rachel's gift for seeing through comfortable lies. Something like that. "Then I definitely want to come." Her eyes were fully open now, that particular gleam that meant she'd already made up her mind. "I'll bring my sketchbook. I'll sit in the corner where nobody will notice." "Please, Dad, I want to see where you work." Marcus knew he should say no, knew that bringing his daughter to a black-tie gala where he was part of the furniture was asking for humiliation. But he was tired, and the rent was due, and Mrs. Patterson had started making comments about how she couldn't keep watching Emma for free forever. Okay, but you stay in the back. You stay quiet. And if anyone gives you trouble, I'll be invisible. Just like you taught me. The words hit harder than she meant them to. Marcus had spent 9 years teaching his daughter how to disappear, how to make herself small enough that the world's cruelty might pass overhead. He'd taught her survival, and somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten to teach her how to live. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Emma's eyes were already closing. Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long moment watching her breathe. Then he walked to the kitchen and made coffee because sleep wasn't coming back. The apartment was small, one bedroom that Emma used a living room where Marcus slept on a futon that had seen better days, a kitchen with appliances from the 1980s. The walls were thin enough that he could hear the couple next door arguing in Spanish, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm he'd learned to tune out. He pulled out his phone and checked his bank balance. $473 until the next paycheck. Rent was $850 due in 5 days. Emma needed new shoes. Her toes were starting to push through the canvas of her sneakers. The electric bill sat on the counter, red text screaming, "Final notice." Marcus did the math he'd been doing for 9 years, the arithmetic of impossible choices. If he picked up extra shifts, if he skipped meals, if he sold the last few things he hadn't already sold, maybe they'd make it to March. His eyes landed on the old leather notebook sitting on top of the refrigerator, the one place Emma couldn't reach without a chair. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were half-finished compositions, melodies that would never be completed, evidence of the person he used to be before grief had burned that person away. Rachel had given him the notebook for his birthday back when they were graduate students, sharing a studio apartment in Harlem and living on rice and ambition. Back when Marcus Webb was the most promising pianist to come through Juilliard in a decade, back when professors used words like prodigy and generational talent. Back when he was someone instead of no one. Marcus poured his coffee and sat at the kitchen table running his fingers over the notebook's worn cover. He didn't open it. Opening it meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling was a luxury he couldn't afford. The city woke up around him. Sirens wailed in the distance. The radiator clanked and hissed. Someone's alarm went off through the wall, tinny and insistent. Marcus finished his coffee and started getting ready for work, the first of 3 jobs that kept Emma fed and housed and just barely clothed. The first job was at a commercial cleaning company, 6 to noon shifts, that had him scrubbing office bathrooms and vacuuming conference rooms. The second was an evening stint at a parking garage where he sat in a booth and took money from people who drove cars worth more than he'd earned in 5 years. The third was the gig work, the event staffing that meant standing for hours in a maintenance uniform while rich people pretended he didn't exist. By the time Emma woke up for school, Marcus had already worked 4 hours and come home to make her breakfast. She stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep, her hair sticking up in directions that defied physics. "Morning, sweetheart." "Scrambled eggs, okay. Is there cheese?" Marcus glanced at the refrigerator, knowing the answer before he looked. "Not today. Maybe next week." Emma didn't complain. She never did. She just nodded and sat down at the table, pulling out her homework from the night before. Math problems covered the page in pencil, her handwriting careful and precise. She'd gotten every problem right. Marcus had checked them last night before she went to bed, because Emma had inherited more than Rachel's face. She'd gotten the brilliant mind, too, the kind of intelligence that should have meant private schools and tutors, and opportunities that Marcus couldn't begin to provide. "How's the project coming?" Marcus set the plate in front of her, the portions smaller than he would have liked. "Good. I'm doing it on people who changed history through art." She took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "I was thinking about doing it on you." Marcus's hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. "Me? You used to play piano really well, right? Before Mom died." "That's art. That's changing things." "I didn't change anything, Em. I just played some notes." "But you were going to." Her eyes held a certainty that made his chest ache. "I've seen the articles in the box under your bed. The reviews from when you played at Lincoln Center. They said you were going to be one of the greats." Marcus sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted despite the coffee. That was a long time ago. Different person, different life. What happened to him? The person who was going to be great, he met his daughter's gaze, those blue eyes so much like Rachel's, that it sometimes felt like looking into the past. Life happened, loss happened, and sometimes the things we love become connected to the people we lost, and we have to put them away to survive. That sounds lonely. It is. Emma finished her eggs in silence. Marcus watched her memorizing the slope of her shoulders, the way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. 9 years old and already carrying too much weight. 9 years old and already learning that the world broke people and expected them to keep walking with broken pieces. The school bus came at 7:15. Marcus walked Emma to the stop, his hand on her shoulder, both of them shivering in the February cold. The other kids were loud and chaotic, showing off new phones and designer sneakers. Emma stood slightly apart, her secondhand coat buttoned up to her chin, her sketchbook clutched against her chest like armor. "Have a good day." Marcus hugged her quickly. "And remember, stay invisible." "I know." Emma pulled back and looked up at him. "But Dad," "Yeah, sometimes being invisible just means people don't have to feel bad about not seeing you." The bus pulled up before Marcus could respond. Emma climbed aboard and found a seat near the back, pressing her face against the window. She waved. Marcus waved back. The bus pulled away and he stood there in the cold until it disappeared around the corner. Sometimes being invisible just means people don't have to feel bad about not seeing you. Marcus walked back to the apartment building, Emma's words echoing in his skull. He had 2 hours before his next shift started. He should have slept. Instead, he found himself climbing the stairs to the roof, the place he went when the walls got too close. The city sprawled out before him, a maze of concrete and ambition and broken dreams. Somewhere out there in one of those glass towers, Victoria Ashford was probably already at work. He'd never met her. She was CEO of the foundation, miles above his pay grade, but he'd seen her photo in the program materials for the gala. Sharp features, sharper eyes, the kind of woman who had probably never worried about choosing between heat and groceries. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the one photo he allowed himself to keep of Rachel. It was from their wedding day, a tiny ceremony at City Hall with 2 borrowed witnesses. She was laughing at something he'd said, her face tilted toward the camera, joy radiating from every pixel. The photo was 6 years old now. Emma had been 4 months along a secret they'd shared with no one except each other. "I'm trying, Rach." Marcus spoke to the wind, to the memory, to whatever remained of the woman who had been his entire world. "I'm trying to keep the promise. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." The wind carried his words away. The city didn't answer. Marcus stood there for 10 more minutes, then went inside to get ready for his next shift. The day passed in the usual blur of cleaning supplies, enforced politeness, and the particular exhaustion that came from working your body past its limits. By the time Marcus got home that evening, Emma was already asleep on the couch, her homework spread out around her, her sketchbook open to a drawing of their apartment building. She'd drawn it beautiful. The crumbling brick transformed into something almost magical. Windows glowing with warm light, flowers growing from the fire escape. Emma's gift was taking ugly things and finding the beauty trapped inside. Marcus wished he still knew how to do that. He carried her to bed without waking her, then returned to the kitchen to eat whatever was left in the refrigerator. Cold rice, a bruised apple, the heel of a loaf of bread. He ate standing up, too tired to sit, his mind already cataloging everything that needed to happen in the next 48 hours before the gala. The uniform had to be cleaned and pressed. Emma's corner spot in the service hallway needed to be cleared with the event coordinator. The grocery shopping had to happen tomorrow because there wasn't time on Saturday. Bills had to be juggled, payments promised, creditors temporarily appeased. Marcus finished eating and started going through the motions of survival. Wash the dishes, check Emma's homework, set up the futon, brush teeth, set the alarm, lie down, stare at the ceiling, calculate how many hours of sleep he could afford. 4, maybe 5 if he was lucky. The alarm went off at 5:30. Marcus dragged himself through another morning of cleaning office buildings, came home to wake Emma, made breakfast from what little remained. Friday passed in the same rhythm as Thursday, the same rhythm as every day for the past 9 years. But Friday night, as Marcus was packing his maintenance uniform for the gala, Emma appeared in the doorway with something in her hands. "I found this." Marcus looked up. She was holding his old leather notebook, the one that should have been out of reach, on top of the refrigerator. His heart stopped. "Emma, that's private. I know. I'm sorry. I used a chair." Her voice was small but determined. but I had to see what was inside. Marcus crossed the room and took the notebook from her hands, holding it like something fragile and dangerous. You had no right. There's a song in there, about me. The words cut through his anger. Marcus opened the notebook with shaking hands, flipping through pages of half-finished compositions until he found it. Emma's lullaby, written in his own handwriting, dated 1 week before Rachel died. The melody was incomplete, just 8 measures that trailed off into blank staff paper. I started it before you were born. Marcus's voice came out rough. Your mom wanted me to write something just for you. Why didn't you finish it? Because finishing it meant accepting that your mother wasn't here to hear it. Because every note felt like betrayal. Because I couldn't play piano without hearing Rachel's voice in my head, teasing and loving and alive, and then remembering she wasn't alive anymore, and the music would turn to ash in my hands. Some things are connected to people, Em. When you lose the person, the thing changes too. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out something that made Marcus's world tilt. A bundle of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Rachel's handwriting on each one precise and heartbreaking. I found these too. In the box under your bed, they have your name on them. Marcus took the letters with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. He'd hidden them years ago, unable to read them, unable to throw them away. Rachel had written them in the weeks before Emma was born, when the doctors had warned her about complications, when they'd both pretended everything would be fine, while secretly preparing for the worst. Did you read them? Just the one on top. Emma's eyes were wet. She wanted you to keep playing Dad. She made you promise. Marcus opened the first envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 3 days before Emma was born. Rachel's handwriting cramped and urgent. My dearest Marcus, if you are reading this, something went wrong. I won't pretend otherwise. We both know the risks, and I've made peace with them. But there's something I need you to understand, something I need you to remember. When grief feels like it will swallow you whole, remember that music saved your life once. When you were a boy, when everything was falling apart, music gave you a place to belong. Don't let my death take that away from you. Our daughter is going to need many things: food, shelter, education. But more than anything, she's going to need to see her father living, not just surviving. She's going to need to see that loss doesn't have to mean the end. Play for her, Marcus. Play for yourself. Play for all the people who are too scared or too broken to believe that beauty is still possible. That's your gift. Don't bury it with me. I love you. I'll always love you. And wherever I am, I'll be listening. Yours forever, Rachel. Marcus couldn't see the words anymore. His vision blurred, tears streaming down his face, 9 years of grief pouring out like water from a broken dam. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, her small body pressed against his, and they stood there in the kitchen while the radiator clanked and the neighbors argued and the world kept turning, despite everything. Why didn't you read them before I was afraid? Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, afraid that reading them would break me completely. But you're still here. Mama looked up at him. You're still standing. Maybe it's time to stop being afraid. The wisdom in her voice made him ache. 9 years old and braver than he'd ever been. 9 years old and already understanding what it had taken him a decade to learn. Maybe. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. But not tonight. Tonight we have a gala to prepare for. Are you still going to bring me? Yeah, sweetheart. I think I need you there. They spent the evening getting ready. Emma packed her sketchbook and pencils, choosing her best jeans and the sweater that only had one small hole in the elbow. Marcus pressed his uniform, polished his work boots, made sure they both had eaten enough to make it through a long night. By the time they left the apartment on Saturday evening, Marcus felt like he was walking towards something inevitable. The letter sat heavy in his pocket. The notebook was tucked into his maintenance bag. Emma held his hand as they descended into the subway, her sketchbook under her arm, her eyes bright with anticipation. The train rattled through the darkness. Marcus watched his reflection in the window, seeing a man who looked older than 42, worn down by too many double shifts and too much grief. Emma leaned against his shoulder, quiet but alert, taking in everything around them. Dad, yeah, do you ever think about going back to playing piano sometimes? Marcus kept his eyes on the window. But thinking about it and doing it are different things. What if you just tried? Just once. The train lurched to a stop. Marcus didn't answer. They changed lines, descended deeper into the city's arterial system, emerged in Midtown where the buildings scraped the sky and the people moved with purpose. Marcus had forgotten how to feel. The Ashford Foundation Gala was held at the Bellamy Hall, a pre-war building that had been lovingly restored into a venue for people with more money than sense. Marcus and Emma entered through the service entrance, a narrow door tucked between dumpsters and loading docks. The hallway inside was concrete and fluorescent lighting, a stark contrast to the marble and crystal that waited beyond. Webb, the shift supervisor, a man named Collins with a permanent scowl, spotted them immediately. "You're late, my apologies." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "This is my daughter, Emma. I cleared it with the coordinator that she could wait in the service area." Collins looked Emma up and down, his expression making it clear what he thought of maintenance staff bringing their kids to work. "Fine, but she stays out of sight. If any guest sees her, you're both gone." "Understood." Collins walked away. Emma squeezed Marcus's hand. "He's pleasant. He's scared." Marcus knelt to her level. "Scared people are usually mean. It makes them feel bigger." "What's he scared of? That the world will see him the same way it sees us, as invisible." Marcus got Emma settled in a small alcove near the kitchen entrance, a corner where she could see part of the main hall through a gap in the curtains but remain hidden. She opened her sketchbook immediately, her pencil moving across the page with the confidence of someone who had learned early that art was a form of escape. "Stay here." Marcus smoothed her hair. "Stay quiet. I'll check on you every hour. I'll be invisible." Emma smiled up at him. "Like you taught me." The words hit just as hard as they had 2 days ago. Marcus walked away before his daughter could see his face crumble. The main hall was already transforming. The maintenance crew moved through the space like ants, each person assigned their specific task in the elaborate choreography of making rich people comfortable. Marcus was on general duty, straightening chairs, cleaning the piano, ensuring no detail was out of place. The piano. It sat center stage, a Steinway Model D that probably cost more than Marcus would earn in 5 years. 9 feet of glossy black perfection, 88 keys that could speak in languages words couldn't reach. Marcus approached it slowly, pulling out his cloth, forcing himself to breathe normally. He hadn't been this close to a real piano in years. The toy keyboard in the apartment didn't count. This was an instrument built for concert halls for performers whose hands could coax miracles from wood and wire. Marcus started polishing his movements, automatic but reverent. The Steinway surface reflected his face back at him, distorted and ghostly. His fingers itched to lift the fallboard to feel the weight of the keys beneath his hands. But touching was forbidden. He was here to clean, not to play. "You're talking to furniture again." Marcus turned. Emma stood just beyond the stage curtain, her sketchbook forgotten, watching him with that too knowing expression. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to stay hidden." "I was hidden, but then I saw you looking at the piano like it was a person." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You love it, don't you, even after everything?" Marcus returned to polishing. "Love is complicated, Em. Sometimes the things we love hurt us the most. Does the piano hurt you?" The question was too big for a simple answer. Yes, it hurt. Every time Marcus saw one, every time he heard music drifting from an open window, every time he remembered what it felt like to play. But the hurt was wrapped up in memory and Rachel and the life he'd lost. "Only because of what it reminds me of." Emma came closer, studying the Steinway with an artist's eye. "It's beautiful, like a cathedral made of wood. That's what your mother used to say." Marcus's throat tightened. "She said pianos were cathedrals with 88 steps to heaven. Then maybe you should climb them again." Before Marcus could respond, a sharp voice cut across the stage. "Mr. Webb." A woman in a dark blazer marched toward them, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. Marcus recognized her from previous events. Diane Victoria Ashford's assistant, the kind of person who measured her worth by how efficiently she could make others feel small. "Your daughter is supposed to be in the service area, not wandering around the stage. I apologize." Marcus stepped between Diane and Emma instinctively. I don't care what she was just doing." Diane's voice was cold. "The guests will be arriving soon and everything needs to look immaculate. That includes not having maintenance staff and their children visible." Emma's hand found Marcus's, her grip tight. Marcus felt something hot and ugly rise in his chest. The urge to tell this woman exactly what he thought of her priorities, her condescension, her casual cruelty. But he swallowed it down because jobs were fragile and bills were real, and Emma needed new shoes. It won't happen again. "See that it doesn't." Diane's eyes swept over the piano. And you've been polishing that for 20 minutes. Move on. She walked away. Marcus counted to 10, then 20, then 30. Emma's hand was still in his, trembling slightly. Dad. Yes, sweetheart. Why do people always talk to you like that? Like what? Like you're not really there. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. Some people only see uniforms, Emma. They don't see the person wearing it. But you're a person. I know that. You know that. He touched her cheek gently. That's enough. Emma's pencil had stopped moving. Is it, though? Before Marcus could answer, the grand doors at the far end of the hall swung open. A wave of voices flooded in. Staff calling instructions, heels clicking against marble, the rustle of expensive fabric. The transformation from warehouse to wonderland was entering its final phase. Come on. Marcus took Emma's hand. Let's get you back to your corner before Collins has a stroke. They slipped through the backstage area, past catering staff carrying trays of champagne flutes, past the string quartets setting up their instruments, past all the machinery required to make an event look effortless. Emma's corner seemed smaller now, more cramped. Marcus made sure she had water and snacks, that her sketchbook was within reach. Draw everything you see. Marcus kissed the top of her head. But stay hidden. I'm always hidden. The sadness in her voice made Marcus pause. He wanted to tell her that it wouldn't always be this way, that someday she'd step into the light and be seen and celebrated. But promises required hope, and hope felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. I love you, sweetheart. Love you too, Dad. Marcus returned to the main hall. The transformation was complete. The Steinway gleamed under stage lights. Tables were draped in white linen place settings arranged with geometric precision. Flowers, expensive, exotic, flown in from somewhere that didn't matter, filled the air with perfume that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of money and self-satisfaction. The guests began arriving exactly on schedule. They came in waves, women in gowns that cost more than Marcus's annual rent, men in tuxedos that fit like second skins. They laughed too loud, touched each other's arms with practiced casualness, checked their phones between conversations about art and culture and the declining state of music education. Marcus worked the edges of the room, collecting empty champagne glasses, straightening chairs that didn't need straightening. He'd perfected the art of invisibility years ago. Move smoothly but not too fast. Make eye contact with no one. Become part of the furniture, animate but irrelevant. He watched them without watching. Saw the CEO types comparing notes on their investment portfolios. The society women displaying their latest cosmetic enhancements. The younger crowd, trust fund kids playing at philanthropy while their parents' money did the actual work. All of them performing their wealth and status like a second language. Victoria Ashford entered exactly 47 minutes before the scheduled start time. Marcus knew this because he'd worked enough of these events to recognize that she always arrived early. Control, he'd realized. People who needed to control everything arrived early to ensure there were no surprises. She paused just inside the entrance, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of someone mentally cataloging every potential problem. 46 years old according to the program materials, though she looked younger. Or maybe just preserved in the way money allowed. Dark suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that was probably called elegant, but read more as armor. Marcus watched her cross to the stage, her heels making no sound against the marble. Years of practice had taught her how to move without announcing herself. She climbed the 3 steps and approached the piano, her hand hovering over the fallboard for just a moment. She didn't touch it, but something in her posture, in the way her fingers trembled before she pulled them back, told Marcus everything he needed to know. This woman had played once, had loved it once, had given it up for reasons that probably still haunted her. Their eyes met across the distance. Half a second of connection before Victoria looked away, but Marcus felt the recognition in that glance. She saw him, not as furniture, not as uniform, but as a person who understood something she thought was private. Then her assistant appeared, clipboard at the ready, and Victoria's mask slid back into place. She walked off the stage without a backward glance, returning to the business of running an empire. Marcus went back to his work. The evening progressed according to script. Speeches were given about the transformative power of music education. Donations were announced with practiced humility that couldn't quite hide the donor's satisfaction at being seen as generous. A string quartet played Vivaldi, the notes precise and emotionless, technically perfect, but spiritually bankrupt. Marcus thought about Emma in her corner, drawing everything she saw. Thought about Rachel's letters in his pocket, the weight of 9 years of promises he'd failed to keep. Thought about the man he used to be, the one who had believed that music could change things, that beauty mattered more than survival. That man felt like a stranger. Quite the circus, isn't it? Marcus turned. A man stood beside him, late 50s, silver hair, perfectly styled, Italian shoes that probably cost more than Marcus's car would have if he could afford a car. The kind of easy confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. Just doing my job, sir. Of course you are. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. The help always is. He walked away before Marcus could respond. Not that Marcus would have. He'd learned long ago that men like that, Richard Crane, according to the name tag, didn't want responses. They wanted audiences for their performance of superiority. The intermission came at 8:30. Marcus used the break to check on Emma. She was exactly where he'd left her sketchbook, filled with drawings of the evening, guests in their finery. The piano from multiple angles. Victoria Ashford standing alone, her expression unguarded for once. You're good at this. Marcus studied the drawings. Really good. I just draw what I see. Emma looked up at him, but yeah. That man from before, the one with the mean smile. He's been watching you. Marcus followed her gaze. Richard Crane stood near the orchestra, pitch champagne glass in hand, his attention fixed on the maintenance staff moving through the hall. On Marcus specifically. Don't worry about him. He looks like he wants to hurt someone. Mean people usually do. Marcus knelt to Emma's level. But we're not going to give him the chance, okay? We're going to stay invisible and do our jobs and go home. What if he doesn't let us stay invisible? Then we deal with it. Marcus tried to sound confident. We always do. The second half began with a soprano performing Puccini. Marcus returned to the edges, collecting programs people had discarded, straightening the same chairs he'd straightened an hour ago. He could feel Crane's eyes on him, tracking his movement through the hall. Something was coming. Marcus could sense it the way animals sense storms. The air had changed, charged with the particular energy that preceded humiliation. The soprano finished to polite applause. The MC returned to the stage with announcements about upcoming foundation events. Marcus was about to slip back into the service hallway when Crane's voice cut through the room. Well, well, if it isn't Beethoven with a mop. Scattered laughter, a few heads turned. Marcus froze, his stomach dropping. Crane was walking toward him, his stride theatrical, playing to the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I've been watching you all evening, janitor. The way you keep looking at that piano like it owes you something. Marcus said nothing. His mind was racing, calculating exits, escape routes, ways to diffuse this before it became a scene. But Crane was between him and every door that mattered. Tell me, Crane's voice rose, ensuring everyone could hear. Do you even know what that instrument is? Or do you just enjoy touching expensive things you'll never be able to afford? More laughter now. Nervous energy rippling through the crowd. The room was transforming from gala to spectacle, and Marcus was the entertainment. He could see Victoria Ashford standing near the bar, her expression unreadable. Could see Collins near the kitchen entrance, his face red with fury at the disruption. Could see Emma emerging from her corner, her sketchbook pressed against her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Come now, Crane gestured broadly. Enlighten us. What makes this particular piano so special to a man who cleans toilets for a living? The room went quiet. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on Marcus. He could feel Emma's terror from across the hall, could feel his own heart hammering against his ribs. Walk away, his mind screamed. Just walk away, pick up your bucket, and disappear. That's what invisible men do. But Emma's words echoed in his head. Sometimes being invisible just means people don't have to feel bad about not seeing you. And Rachel's letter burned in his pocket. Don't let my death take that away from you. Marcus met Crane's eyes. Something shifted in his chest, something that had been buried so long he'd forgotten it existed. Not anger, though that was there. Something deeper, something that refused to be erased. It's a Steinway Model D. Marcus's voice was quiet, but it carried. 9 feet long, 12,000 moving parts. The soundboard is Sitka spruce grown slow and high for optimal resonance. The rim is made of 17 layers of hard rock maple bent and shaped over weeks. The action, the mechanism that translates touch into sound, contains more engineering than most modern cars. The room was listening now. Crane's smirk had faltered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The keys were originally ivory, but those were replaced with composite polymer in the 90s. The strings are wound steel precision tuned to A440 standard pitch. The whole instrument weighs nearly 1,000 pounds, and every ounce of that weight serves a purpose. Marcus paused. It costs more than your Mercedes, Mr. Crane, and it holds more stories than your column ever will. Silence. Absolute electric silence. Crane's face had gone pale, his confident performance shattered. For one perfect moment, the mask slipped, and Marcus saw what lived underneath. Not anger, fear, the fear of a man who had just been seen and found wanting. Marcus gathered his bucket and cloth, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. If you'll excuse me, sir, I have work to do. He walked toward the service exit. Behind him, whispers began, the sound of 300 people recalibrating their judgment. At the door, Emma was waiting, her face pale, but her eyes bright with something that might have been pride. Dad. Yes, sweetheart. That was really brave. That was really stupid. Marcus took her hand. There's a difference. No, her voice was firm, certain. It was brave. You didn't let him make you small. They slipped through the door into the service hallway. Marcus leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, his whole body shaking with delayed reaction. He'd just committed career suicide for the sake of pride. Collins would fire him. The other venues would hear about it. In a city where jobs were scarce and references mattered, Marcus had just burned every bridge that kept him employed. But Emma was looking at him like he'd done something heroic, and for the first time in 9 years, Marcus felt like maybe he had. They walked toward the small break room where Marcus had left his bag. The hallway was quiet, insulated from the murmur of the Gala continuing without them. Emma's hand was warm in his, her grip tight. Dad, yeah, are you in trouble? Probably. Was it worth it? Marcus thought about Crane's face, the fear in his eyes when confronted with competence from someone he'd dismissed as furniture. Thought about the room full of people who had just watched a man in a maintenance uniform speak with authority about something he knew better than any of them. Yeah, sweetheart, I think it was. They reached the break room. Marcus was pulling out his phone to call for their coats when he heard footsteps behind them. He turned, expecting Collins with a termination notice. Victoria Ashford stood in the hallway. She'd removed her heels, standing barefoot on the concrete. Her careful composure cracked enough that Marcus could see the person underneath the CEO. I saw what happened. Her voice was quiet. With Richard Crane. I apologize if I disrupted. You didn't disrupt anything. Victoria moved closer. He's been disrupting things for 30 years. It was refreshing to see someone actually respond. I shouldn't have said anything. Marcus kept his voice level. It was unprofessional. Was it? Victoria studied him, or was it just true? The question hung in the air. Emma pressed against Marcus's side, watching this strange woman with her artist's eye. Who are you? Victoria asked. I mean, really, where did you learn to speak about that piano like you built it yourself, Juilliard? Marcus hadn't said the word aloud in years, a long time ago. Victoria's eyes widened. Juilliard, and now you're working maintenance at Gala's. Life doesn't always go according to plan. No, something flickered in Victoria's expression. It doesn't. She looked at Emma. Is this your daughter? Emma nodded. I'm 9. You're very brave. Victoria's voice softened. Coming to defend your father like that, he's worth defending. Victoria smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. I'm beginning to see that. She turned back to Marcus. Don't disappear. Not yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. She straightened, some of her CEO composure returning, but softer now. Because I think we need to talk. About music. About what happens when talented people get buried by circumstance. About second chances. Marcus felt Emma's grip tighten on his hand. I have a shift starting at 8 tomorrow morning. Take it off. I'll make sure you are compensated. I can't afford to. You can't afford not to. Victoria's voice was firm but kind. This isn't charity, Marcus. It's recognition. There's a difference. He studied her face, looking for the angle to catch. He'd spent too many years surviving not to be suspicious of sudden generosity. But he didn't see calculation in her eyes. He saw something else, hope. Okay, Marcus heard himself say. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Victoria handed him a business card. My office. Bring your daughter if you need to. She walked away, disappearing back toward the gala. Marcus stood in the hallway, the business card heavy in his hand, Emma's presence solid beside him. Dad, what just happened, I think? Marcus looked at the card at Victoria Ashford's name embossed in silver. I think something changed. Is that good? I don't know yet, sweetheart. But it's different, and different has to count for something. They collected their coats and left through the service entrance. The city was alive with Saturday night chaos, people streaming toward restaurants and bars and whatever entertainment they could afford. Marcus and Emma walked toward the subway in silence, both processing what had just happened. The letters were still in Marcus's pocket. The notebook was still in his bag, but something inside him had shifted like tectonic plates moving after years of stillness. The earthquake hadn't hit yet, but the first tremors had arrived. On the subway, Emma leaned against his shoulder, exhausted from the evening. Marcus watched their reflection in the dark window. Father and daughter returning home from a night that might have changed everything or nothing. Dad, yeah, sweetheart. When you talked about the piano, you sounded like you used to. What do I usually sound like? Quiet, like you're trying not to be heard. Marcus wrapped his arm around her. And tonight you sounded loud. Emma looked up at him, like you remembered you had a voice. The train rattled through the tunnel. Marcus felt the weight of 9 years pressing against his chest, 9 years of silence and survival, and choosing invisibility over pain. But Emma was right. Tonight, for just a few minutes, he'd remembered what it felt like to be seen. The question was whether he could handle being visible again, whether exposure would heal him or destroy what little remained. They got off at their stop and climbed the stairs to street level. The neighborhood was quieter here, working-class blocks where people kept their heads down and their business to themselves. Marcus and Emma walked past corner stores with security glass and apartment buildings that had seen better decades. Home felt smaller after the grandeur of the Bellamy Hall. Marcus unlocked the door and they entered the familiar cramped space. Emma went straight to the bathroom to brush her teeth. Marcus stood in the kitchen, Victoria's business card still in his hand. Tomorrow at 10, an appointment with the CEO of the most powerful arts foundation in New York. A conversation about second chances and buried talent in music that had been silent for 9 years. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked his bank balance. Still $473. Still impossible math. But maybe, just maybe, a door had opened that might lead somewhere other than the endless grind of survival. He opened the notebook to the page where Emma's lullaby, he waited and finished. 8 measures that trailed off into nothing. Rachel's voice echoed in his memory. Play for her. Play for yourself. Don't bury your gift with me. Marcus sat at the kitchen table and picked up a pencil. For the first time in 9 years, he added a note to the staff paper. Then another. The melody that had been frozen in time began to move again, hesitant and uncertain, but alive. Dad, Marcus looked up. Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her hair damp from washing her face. Are you writing the song? The one for me? Yeah, sweetheart. I think I'm finally ready to finish it. Emma crossed the kitchen and climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in months. She was getting too big for it, her legs dangling awkwardly, but Marcus held her anyway. They sat there in the quiet apartment looking at the incomplete lullaby together. Will you play it for me when it's done, I promise? Emma rested her head against his chest. I think Mom would be proud that you're trying again. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I hope so. I know so. Emma's voice was drowsy now. She's always watching, always listening. She told me in a dream once. What did she say? That music doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to wake it up. Marcus held his daughter as her breathing slowed and deepened. The city hummed around them, sirens and traffic and the endless noise of millions of lives intersecting and separating. But in this small kitchen, in this moment, there was only the weight of his child in his arms and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than invisible. He carried Emma to bed and tucked her in, watching her sleep for a long moment. Then he returned to the kitchen and kept writing. The notes came slowly at first, then faster as muscle memory awakened. The lullaby grew measure by measure, taking shape from the raw material of grief and love and hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Marcus wrote until his hand cramped, until the first light of dawn began creeping through the window, until the song that had waited 9 years finally found its ending. He set down the pencil and looked at the completed piece. It wasn't perfect, The transitions were rough in places, the harmonies more complicated than a traditional lullaby. But it was real. It was honest. It was the sound of a man learning to breathe again after years of holding his breath. Marcus made coffee as the city woke up around him. Sunday morning meant traffic was lighter, the usual chaos replaced by something almost peaceful. He showered and dressed, choosing his best clothes jeans without holes, a button-down shirt that Emma had ironed for him last week because she'd decided he needed to look presentable. Emma woke at 8 bright-eyed despite the late night. She came into the kitchen and saw the notebook open on the table. "You finished it, yeah." Marcus poured her orange juice. "Want to hear it now?" "Why not?" They didn't have a piano, but Marcus hummed the melody, his voice rough from disuse. Emma listened with her whole body leaning forward, her eyes tracking his face. When he finished, she was crying. "It's beautiful." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "It sounds like what love would sound like if love was music. That's exactly what it is." Emma hugged him fiercely. "I'm glad you remembered how to make beautiful things." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They ate breakfast together, both of them nervous about the meeting, but trying not to show it. Marcus kept checking the time, watching the minutes crawl toward 10 a.m. Emma packed her sketchbook without being asked, understanding that wherever her father went today, she was coming too. At 9:30, they left the apartment and headed back toward Midtown. The Sunday morning subway was filled with churchgoers and shift workers and people nursing hangovers from Saturday night. Marcus and Emma found seats near the back, both quiet with anticipation. "What do you think she wants?" Emma asked as they rattled through the darkness. "I don't know." Marcus watched the tunnel walls flash past. "But whatever it is, it feels important." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good," Emma smiled. "That means you care." The Ashford Foundation building was glass and steel, reaching toward the sky with the confidence of money and influence. Marcus and Emma stood on the sidewalk, looking up, both of them distinctly out of place in their thrift store clothes. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "Are you?" "Not even a little bit." They entered the lobby together. The security guard looked them up and down, clearly skeptical that they belonged. Marcus showed Victoria's business card. The guard made a call, then directed them to the elevator. The ride-up was silent except for the soft, mechanical hum. Marcus watched the numbers climb each floor, taking them further from the world they knew. Emma pressed close to his side, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. The elevator opened onto a reception area that was all marble and modern art. A young woman with a clipboard approached them, professional smile in place. "Mr. Webb, I'm Diane. Miss Ashford is expecting you." Marcus recognized her as Victoria's assistant from the previous night. Her expression suggested she remembered him too, though whether that was good or bad remained unclear. "Please follow me." They walked down a corridor lined with photographs of musicians and concert halls. Diane led them to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria Ashford stood waiting, and the sight of her stopped Marcus in his tracks. She wasn't in a business suit. Today she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, less armored, more human. And in the corner of her office sat a baby grand piano. "Marcus." Victoria extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me." Victoria's eyes moved to Emma. "And you brought your daughter. I hope that's okay." Marcus felt suddenly protective. "She's part of why I'm here." "Of course it's okay." Victoria's voice was genuine. "Please, both of you sit." There were comfortable chairs arranged near the window. Marcus and Emma sat both perched on the edge, like they might need to run. Victoria sat across from them, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Victoria broke the silence. "I didn't sleep last night. After what happened at the gala, after hearing you talk about that piano like you'd spent your life studying it, I did some research." She pulled out a folder and opened it. "Marcus Webb, Juilliard Scholarship, 1999. Graduated top of your class. Your professors called you the most naturally gifted pianist they'd seen in decades. You were supposed to debut with the Philharmonic in 2006. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago. You withdrew a month before the concert." Victoria's voice was gentle. "Your wife died." "Yes." "And you stopped playing." "Yes." Victoria closed the folder. "I'm not asking you to explain 9 years of grief. I'm not asking you to justify anything. I'm asking you to consider what might happen if you stopped hiding." "I'm not hiding. I'm surviving." Is there a difference? The question hit harder than any accusation could have. Marcus felt Emma's hand find his, her grip tight and supportive. When Rachel died, Marcus said quietly, I couldn't separate the music from her. Every note reminded me of something we'd shared. Every chord felt like betrayal, like I was trying to move on when moving on was impossible. And now, Marcus paused, searching for truth in the wreckage. Now the music doesn't feel like grief. It feels like connection, like she's there listening the way she used to. Victoria stood and walked to the piano in the corner. She ran her hand along the closed lid. This was my grandmother's, a 1952 Steinway Model B. She taught me to play on it when I was 5 years old. You play, I used to. Victoria's voice was tight. I was good. Very good. I was going to compete professionally, make a career of it. But I lost a competition when I was 16. One I'd practiced for obsessively. One my mother told me would determine everything. What happened, I made 3 mistakes in the final passage. 3 wrong notes that probably no one but the judges noticed. Victoria's hands trembled against the piano. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks, told me I'd embarrassed her, that my heart was too soft, too emotional, that music wasn't about feeling, it was about precision. So you stopped. So I stopped. Victoria turned to face them. For 22 years, I've been running this foundation funding programs and supporting musicians, all while telling myself I was over it. But watching you last night, hearing you defend that piano like it was a living thing. She paused. You reminded me what I've been running from. Emma spoke up suddenly. You're scared too. Victoria smiled sadly. Yes, I'm scared too. Marcus stood and crossed to the piano. He placed his hand on the lid, feeling the smooth wood beneath his palm. May I please? He lifted the fallboard. The keys gleamed in the morning light, ivory white and black, waiting. Marcus sat down on the bench, his heart hammering. He hadn't sat at a real piano in 9 years. Hadn't allowed himself even this much. His fingers hovered over the keys. Rachel's voice echoed in his memory. Play for her, play for yourself. Don't bury your gift with me. Marcus pressed down. A single C major chord rang through the office, clear and pure and alive. The sound hit him like a physical blow. 9 years of silence shattering in an instant. His breath caught. Victoria moved closer. Emma stood and came to the piano, her hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. Keep going, she whispered. She's listening. Marcus played the opening measures of Emma's lullaby, the song he'd finished just hours ago. The melody filled the office, tentative at first, then stronger as confidence returned. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of grief and survival. Victoria listened with tears streaming down her face. Emma watched her father's hands move across the keys, seeing him fully alive for the first time in her memory. The music spoke what words couldn't: loss and love, and the possibility of healing, all wrapped in notes that had waited 9 years to be heard. Marcus played through to the end, the final chord fading into silence. He lifted his hands from the keys and sat there trembling, barely able to breathe. Something inside him had broken open, and he wasn't sure if he was falling apart or finally coming together. That was. Victoria's voice was rough with emotion. That was extraordinary. It's for Emma. Marcus looked at his daughter. I promised her mother I'd finish it. Victoria wiped her eyes. I want to fund a program. Not the usual kind, not performances for wealthy donors who don't actually care. Something real. Music in public schools and community centers, in places where people need it. That sounds incredible. I want you to run it. Marcus turned to stare at her. What? You heard me. Victoria moved closer. Last night you showed me that talent isn't about pedigree or training or where someone comes from. It's about understanding what music actually is. Not performance, not competition, connection. I don't know if I can. You can. Victoria's voice was firm. You just proved it. That lullaby wasn't technically perfect, but it was real. It was honest. It was what music is supposed to be. Marcus felt Emma's hand on his shoulder, grounding him. I'm a janitor who happens to play piano. You're a musician who got buried by grief and circumstance. Victoria sat beside him on the bench. That's exactly what this program needs. Not someone polished, someone real. And if I fail, then you fail and you try again. That's what music teaches us. Every wrong note is just practice for the right one. Marcus looked at the piano, then at Emma, then at Victoria. Three people in a room, all of them broken in different ways, all of them looking for something they'd lost. When would this start? Whenever you're ready. I still have bills to pay, a job I'll probably get fired from after last night. The foundation will provide a salary. Victoria pulled out a folder. Enough to cover your expenses and then some. You'll have time to create, to teach, to do this properly. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window, her back to them. When I was 16, the night after I lost that competition, I sat in my room and stared at my hands for 3 hours. I kept thinking, these hands have failed me. These hands will never be good enough. She turned to face them. My mother told me the problem wasn't my hands, it was my heart. Too soft, too emotional. That music wasn't about feeling, it was about precision. And I believed her. For 22 years, I believed that caring too much was my weakness. And now I know she was wrong. Victoria's voice was steady. Music is nothing but feeling. Precision without emotion is just noise. And the reason I've built this foundation, the reason I've funded all these programs is because I've been trying to prove she was wrong. Trying to show that heart matters. You want me to help you prove it. I want you to prove it to yourself. Victoria smiled. I've already learned my lesson. Now it's your turn. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not a sudden transformation, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Light was getting through, painful, terrifying light that made him want to hide and run and play piano until his fingers bled. I need to talk to Emma. Marcus looked at his daughter. She's the one who pushed me to do this. She deserves to be part of the decision. Of course, Victoria gestured to the door. Take all the time you need. Marcus and Emma walked to the hallway. They stood by the window overlooking the city, both of them silent for a long moment. What do you think, sweetheart? Emma looked up at him with Rachel's eyes. I think Mom sent us here. How do you figure? Because this is what she wanted. For you to play again. For us to have something more than just surviving. Emma's voice was certain. And I think you're ready. I'm terrified. Good. That means it matters. Marcus pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. How did you get so wise? I had good teachers. Emma pulled back and looked at him seriously. Mom, you, the piano that taught you how to feel things bigger than words. Marcus felt tears on his face. He wiped them away roughly. If we do this, everything changes. Maybe that's okay. Maybe change is what we need. They stood there in the hallway, father and daughter, on the edge of something that could save them or destroy what little stability they had. The city sprawled below them, millions of people making impossible choices every day, surviving or living or trying to find the difference between the two. Marcus took Emma's hand. Let's go tell her yes. They returned to the office. Victoria was standing by the piano, her fingers resting on the keys but not pressing down. She looked up when they entered, hope and uncertainty mixed in her expression. Okay, Marcus's voice was steady. Let's do this. Let's build something that matters. Victoria's face transformed, genuine joy breaking through her careful composure. Then let's get started. They spent the next 2 hours talking about the program structure, about locations, about the kind of students they wanted to reach. Emma sat in the corner drawing, capturing the moment when her father stopped being invisible and started being seen. Marcus felt Rachel with them in that office, felt her in the music still echoing in his bones, in Emma's wisdom, in the possibility that maybe grief didn't have to be the end of everything. Maybe it could be the beginning of something new. By the time they left the foundation building, the sun was high and bright. Marcus and Emma walked toward the subway, both of them quiet with the weight of what had just happened. Everything had changed. The path forward was uncertain and terrifying and full of potential failure. But for the first time in 9 years, Marcus Webb felt like he was walking towards something instead of just away from everything he'd lost. Emma took his hand as they descended into the station. Dad, yeah, sweetheart, thank you for being brave. Thank you for making me remember how. The train arrived, they boarded and found seats. Marcus pulled out the notebook and opened it to the completed lullaby. The notes looked back at him, evidence that he could still create, still make something beautiful from the raw material of pain. Emma leaned against his shoulder. Play it for me again tonight. When we get home, I promise. And maybe, Emma's voice was soft, maybe this is just the beginning. Maybe there are more songs waiting. Marcus looked at his daughter, this small, brave person who had pushed him to cross the street, who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Maybe you're right. The train rattled through the darkness carrying them home. But home felt different now. Not just a place to survive, but a place to live. Not just walls and worn furniture, but the foundation for whatever came next. Marcus closed his eyes and heard Rachel's voice one more time, clear as memory allowed play for her. Play for yourself. Don't bury your gift with me. He wasn't burying it anymore. He was digging it up, painful and messy and necessary. The music was coming back, and with it, maybe so was the man he used to be. Or maybe Marcus thought as the train emerged into daylight, maybe he was becoming someone new. Someone who carried grief without being crushed by it. Someone who could be both father and musician survivor and artist. Someone who had finally learned that being invisible just meant the world didn't have to see its own cruelty. And Marcus was done making that easy for anyone. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and terrifying, and full of possibility. But Emma's hand was in his and music was waiting, and that had to be enough. It had to be. The abandoned chapel on 47th Street smelled like failure and forgotten prayers. Marcus stood in the doorway 3 weeks after the meeting in Victoria's office, surveying the wreckage of what had once been a community music school. Dust covered every surface thick enough to write obituaries in. Windows were filmed with grime that turned the morning light gray and defeated. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like spreading disease. "This is perfect." Victoria's voice came from behind him, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She moved past him into the main room, her eyes cataloging damage and potential with equal precision. Perfect for what? A haunted house for starting over. Victoria crossed to the center where a baby grand piano sat beneath a canvas tarp. The foundation acquired this building last year. 7 years empty, no one could figure out what to do with it. Until now. Until now, Marcus walked slowly through the space, his boots leaving tracks in the dust. The bones were good high ceilings with exposed beams, hardwood floors beneath the grime acoustics that whispered promise despite the decay. Along one wall, folding chairs sat stacked and forgotten. A chalkboard still held the ghostly outline of musical notation, half erased and haunting. How many students came here? Before it closed, Victoria pulled a folder from her bag, always prepared with data. 200 at its peak. Kids from the neighborhood, adults wanting lessons, a few serious students preparing for conservatory auditions. Then the funding dried up and the director died and everyone just walked away. Marcus lifted the tarp covering the piano. The instrument underneath looked tired but salvageable. Finished dulled keys yellowed but the soundboard intact. He pressed middle C. The note rang out flat and sad, out of tune but still capable of sound. It needs work. Everything here needs work. That's why we're starting with it. Victoria moved to stand beside him. You can't teach people about resurrection if you're not willing to resurrect something yourself. The observation landed with more weight than she probably intended. Marcus ran his fingers across the dusty keys, hearing potential beneath the neglect. This piano had stories trapped inside it, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Emma appeared in the doorway, her sketchbook already out. She'd been exploring the side rooms, former practice spaces now filled with broken music stands and water-damaged sheet music. "Dad, there's a whole library back there. Hundreds of books. Most of them are ruined, but some might be salvageable." "Good eye, sweetheart." Marcus smiled at her. "We'll need those." Over the next 6 weeks, the chapel transformed. Marcus quit his maintenance jobs, a conversation with Collins that involved exactly 3 words before the man told him to get out. The foundation's salary was enough to cover rent and groceries, with something left over, a luxury Marcus hadn't experienced in 9 years. He poured every waking hour into the renovation. Victoria found volunteers, college students needing community service hours, retired contractors who remembered when the neighborhood had music schools on every corner. Even some of the foundation's board members showed up with paintbrushes, though their techniques suggested this was their first encounter with manual labor. Emma documented everything. Her sketchbook filled with images of the transformation, walls going from water-stained to pristine white floors, sanded and sealed, windows cleaned until light poured through like revelation. She drew the volunteers, capturing the moment when strangers became a community through the shared act of building something that mattered. The piano went to a specialist who spent 3 days bringing it back to life. New strings, regulation of the action, voicing each hammer until the tone was warm and responsive. When it returned, Marcus spent an hour just playing scales, reacquainting himself with the instrument's personality. "What are you going to call this place?" Victoria found him late one evening alone at the piano, his fingers moving through Chopin etude that he thought he'd forgotten. Marcus stopped playing. Emma suggested something. "The listening room. The listening room." Victoria repeated the words, slowly testing them. "Because that's what we're doing here. Not just teaching people to play, teaching them to listen, to themselves, to each other, to the things that need to be heard." "I like it." Victoria sat on the bench beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "It's honest. No pretense, no performance, just listening." Marcus felt the warmth of her presence, the way it filled spaces he'd kept empty for years. 3 weeks of working side by side had created an intimacy neither of them had planned for. They'd shared coffee at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. They'd argued about curriculum and teaching methods and whether music theory mattered more than emotional connection. They'd found themselves laughing at things that weren't funny, just expressions of relief that maybe life could still contain joy. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus kept his eyes on the keys. "Why does this matter so much to you? The foundation already funds dozens of programs. Why invest so much in this one?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Because all those other programs are safe. They check boxes, generate tax write-offs, make board members feel philanthropic. But they don't actually change anything. And this already has." Victoria's voice dropped. "You changed something in me at that gala. Reminded me what music was before it became a weapon. My mother used to hurt me." Marcus turned to face her. "Tell me about her." "Your mother." Victoria's mask slipped, revealing the wound beneath. "She was a concert pianist. Brilliant, precise, ruthless. She saw me as an extension of herself, a second chance to achieve what she never quite managed. Every lesson was training for battle. Every performance was a test I couldn't afford to fail. What happened when you did fail at that competition? She looked at me like I'd betrayed her. Like those 3 wrong notes proved everything she'd feared, that I was weak, that my heart was too soft, that caring about beauty instead of winning made me worthless." Victoria's hands trembled in her lap. She stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks. When she finally did, all she said was that emotion was the enemy of excellence. That's not true, I know that now. But at 16, I believed her. So I put the piano away and spent 22 years building this foundation as penance, trying to prove I still valued music even though I'd failed at playing it. "You didn't fail." Marcus reached over and covered her hand with his. "You were 16 years old being asked to be perfect by someone who should have just loved you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. No one ever said that before. Then people weren't paying attention. They sat together in the silence, the weight of shared damage, creating connection. Marcus understood what it felt like to bury the things you loved. Victoria understood what it meant to perform worthiness instead of just existing. Between them, maybe they could teach other people how to be whole. The listening room opened on a cold morning in late March. Marcus stood at the entrance watching the first students arrive, his stomach churning with anxiety that felt almost forgotten after years of emotional numbness. Thomas came first. 63 Vietnam veteran hands that shook from nerve damage caused by an explosion that had killed his best friend. He'd seen the flyer at the VA hospital, free music lessons, all welcome, and decided he had nothing left to lose. "I used to play harmonica." Thomas's voice was gravel and cigarettes. "Before the war. My grandmother taught me. But after I came back, my hands wouldn't cooperate anymore." Marcus studied those trembling hands, seeing the fear beneath the damage. Music doesn't require steady hands, just honest ones. Maria arrived next with her 4 children in tow, the youngest barely 3, and strapped to her back. 28 years old, but her eyes held decades of exhaustion. She'd grown up in foster care, moving from home to home, never owning anything beautiful. The flyer had found her at the laundromat. "I don't know anything about music." Maria's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I can't even afford lessons. This isn't a mistake. It's really free. Really free." Victoria stepped forward, her CEO persona softened by genuine warmth. "And your children are welcome to stay while you learn. We have books, toys, activities. Why would you do this for strangers?" Marcus thought about Rachel's letters about 9 years of grief about Emma pushing him to cross the street because someone did it for me once, and it saved my life. David appeared alone 17 with autism that made eye contact feel like staring into the sun. His mother had called ahead warning them that he was difficult, that he couldn't handle unexpected changes, that he heard music in everything but couldn't translate it to instruments. The radiator hums in B-flat. David spoke to the floor, his hands moving in complex patterns against his thighs. The traffic outside is mostly in C, but every third car drops to A. The fluorescent lights buzz at exactly 60 hertz. Marcus knelt to David's eye level without forcing eye contact. That's extraordinary. Most people can't hear that. Most people think I'm broken. You're not broken. You're tuned to a different frequency. Let's figure out how to make that into music. Grace was the last to arrive, 71, with Alzheimer's slowly stealing her memories. Her daughter Evelyn brought her, explaining that Grace had been a piano teacher for 40 years before the disease took that too. She doesn't remember my name most days. Evelyn's voice cracked. But sometimes she sits at my old keyboard and plays Gershwin perfectly note for note. And for those few minutes, she's herself again. Grace looked at Marcus with eyes that were present one moment and distant the next. Do I know you? Not yet. Marcus took her hand gently. But I hope you will. The first class was chaos. Thomas's hand shook so badly he could barely hold a pencil to write notes. Maria kept apologizing for her children's noise, ready to flee at the first sign of annoyance. David stood in the corner, overwhelmed by too many new stimuli. Grace asked where she was 4 times in 20 minutes. Marcus wanted to panic, wanted to admit he had no idea what he was doing, that teaching music to people this damaged was beyond his abilities. But then he looked at Victoria watching from the back, her expression full of faith he didn't deserve. Looked at Emma drawing in her corner, capturing the beautiful disaster of their first attempt. He walked to the piano and sat down. Okay, let's stop trying to do this the right way. Let's just do it our way. He played the opening measures of Emma's lullaby, the song that had waited 9 years to be born. Simple melody, honest emotion, nothing technically complex, but everything emotionally real. This is what music is. Marcus kept playing, his voice carrying over the notes. Not perfection, not performance, just saying the things you can't say with words. Thomas's hands still drawn by the sound. Maria's children quieted, sensing something important was happening. David's patterns slowed, synchronizing with the rhythm. Grace's eyes cleared, focusing on the piano with recognition that transcended her broken memory. Some of you haven't played in decades. Marcus transitioned into a gentle improvisation. Some of you have never played at all. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here. And being here means you're ready to listen. Thomas raised his trembling hand. What if we can't? What if there's too much noise in our heads? Then we start there. Marcus stopped playing and looked at each student in turn. We play the noise, we give it a voice, and eventually the noise becomes music. The weeks that followed were harder than Marcus expected and more rewarding than he'd dared hope. Thomas worked through simple scales, his shaking hands slowly finding rhythm in the repetition. The notes weren't clean, but they were his, earned through patience and the gradual acceptance that perfection wasn't the goal. My wife cried, Thomas said after his third week, wonder in his voice. I played her this little melody I'd been working on. Nothing fancy, just 8 notes. But she cried and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd heard in 50 years, because it was you. Marcus understood the miracle in that moment. After everything you've survived, you're still making beauty. Maria's transformation was slower, weighted down by years of being told she didn't deserve good things. She approached the piano like it might reject her, her fingers hovering over the keys for long minutes before she could bring herself to press down. What if I'm not good at this? Maria's fear was naked and raw. What if I try and fail and prove everyone right who said I'd never amount to anything? Then you try again. Victoria had started attending classes, sitting quietly in the back, but increasingly drawn into conversations. That's what we do here. We keep trying until the music comes back. But what if it never was there to begin with? It's always there. Marcus played a simple chord progression. Listen, that's CFG. 3 chords that most pop songs are built from. You already know them. You've heard them 1,000 times. Now you just need to trust yourself enough to find them. Maria's fingers finally touched the keys. The sound that emerged was hesitant and wrong, but it was sound. She looked up with tears on her face and something like hope cracking through the despair. I made that. Her voice was full of wonder. I made music. You did. And tomorrow you'll make more. David's progress was nonlinear. Brilliant moments interspersed with shutdowns when the stimulation became too much. But when he found his groove, the music that emerged was unlike anything Marcus had heard. Complex patterns that shouldn't work, but somehow did melodies that followed rules only David could perceive. He hears the world differently. Marcus told Victoria after a session where David had improvised for 20 minutes straight, most of us hear music as melody and harmony. He hears it as mathematics, as pattern, recognition, as pure structure. Is that better or worse? It's not either. It's just his truth. Our job is helping him translate that into something he can share. One evening, David played a piece he'd composed, a strange angular melody that captured the rhythm of his breathing, the pattern of his heartbeat, the way his mind moved through space. The other students listened in silence, not understanding, but recognizing something real. That was brave. Grace spoke up suddenly, her eyes clear for the moment, showing us who you are. Not everyone can do that. David still didn't make eye contact, but Marcus saw his shoulders straighten slightly. The boy who thought he was broken had just been told he was brave. Grace's story was the hardest to witness. Most days she forgot where she was, who Marcus was, why she'd come. But Evelyn brought her anyway 3 times a week, driven by the hope that music might preserve something her mother's disease was destroying. She was a teacher for 40 years, Evelyn told Marcus during one of Grace's bad days. Taught hundreds of students. Some of them are professional musicians now. But she doesn't remember any of it. What does she remember? The music. Always the music. Put her at a piano and she can play Gershwin's entire catalog from memory. But ask her what she had for breakfast, and she has no idea. Marcus worked with Grace differently than the others. He didn't try to teach her new things. Instead, he asked her to teach him, to show him the pieces she remembered. And in those moments when her hands found Rhapsody in Blue or Someone to Watch Over Me, Grace came back. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to remind everyone that she was still in there, preserved in the music like amber. Thank you, Evelyn said one evening after Grace had played flawlessly for 15 minutes, for treating her like she's still here. She is still here. Marcus gestured to the piano. That's her right there in every note. The disease can take her memory, but it can't take this. But Richard Crane was working to take everything else. Marcus first heard about the sabotage from Victoria, who'd received a call from a major donor expressing concern about the Foundation's new initiative. Concerns that had been planted by someone with influence and a personal grudge. He's been making calls. Victoria paced, her office fury barely contained. To board members, to donors, to anyone who'll listen. Saying you're unqualified, that the program is wasting resources, that we're enabling people instead of actually helping them. Let him talk. Marcus tried to sound more confident than he felt. The work speaks for itself, not to people who measure everything in metrics and outcomes. Victoria stopped pacing and faced him. Crane has credibility in this world. When he says something is amateur, people listen. So we prove him wrong. How? We've been open 6 weeks. We have 4 students who are just beginning to find their way. What do we have to show that will convince people this matters? Marcus thought about Thomas playing for his wife, about Maria's children watching their mother claim something beautiful, about David's strange, brilliant compositions, about Grace transcending her disease through Gershwin. We show them the truth. Marcus met Victoria's eyes. We invite them to see what's actually happening here. You want to have a recital? Already I want to stop hiding. Marcus felt Rachel's letters in his pocket, carried everywhere like talismans. These students are changing. Let people see that change. What if it backfires? What if Crane uses it to prove his point? Then at least we'll have tried. At least we won't have let fear decide what we're capable of. Victoria studied him for a long moment. When did you get so brave? When I finally had something worth being brave for. The recital was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Marcus announced it to his students with more confidence than he felt, watching their reactions range from terror to cautious excitement. I can't perform. Thomas's hand shook harder, just thinking about it. I'll mess up. Everyone will see how broken I am. Everyone already sees your hands shake. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. What they don't see is the courage it takes to keep trying anyway. Show them that. Maria was even more resistant, her eyes wide with panic. I'm not ready. I've only been playing 2 months. I'll embarrass myself. I'll embarrass you. You can't embarrass me. Marcus sat beside her at the piano. This isn't about being ready. It's about showing up. About saying, I'm here, I'm learning I matter. But what if I freeze? What if I forget everything? Then you start again. That's what we do here, Maria. We start again. David didn't express fear verbally, but Marcus saw it in his increased stimming, the way his hands moved faster against his thighs when the recital was mentioned. Marcus sat with him one afternoon, both of them silent for a long time. You don't have to perform if you don't want to. Marcus kept his voice level. This isn't a requirement. Everyone else is doing it. Everyone else isn't you. You get to choose what feels right. David was quiet, his fingers drumming complex rhythms. What if I play something and people don't understand it? Then they don't understand it. Marcus met David's gaze, one of the rare moments of eye contact. But they'll hear it. And hearing it might change something in them, even if they don't understand why. Is that enough? It's everything. Only Grace seemed untroubled by the prospect, though Marcus suspected that was because she forgot about it between reminders. But Evelyn was nervous enough for both of them. What if she has a bad day? What if she gets up there and doesn't remember anything? Then she doesn't remember. Marcus tried to sound reassuring. But if she has a good moment, if the music finds her the way it does, sometimes everyone will see what's still there beneath the disease. You're asking a lot of her. Of all of them. I'm asking them to be seen. Marcus thought about the gala, about Richard Crane's mockery, about the moment he'd chosen visibility over safety. That's terrifying, but it's also the only way forward. Victoria threw herself into preparation with the intensity she brought to everything. Invitations went to donors and board members. Press releases went to local papers. The listening room got cleaned and organized until it gleamed. She ordered a new sound system, programs printed on quality paper flowers that probably cost more than Marcus wanted to know. You're nervous. Marcus found her late one evening alone at the piano, her fingers resting on the keys without pressing down. Terrified, Victoria didn't look up. What if this doesn't work? What if people watch your students struggle and decide Crane is right, that we're wasting time and money on people who can't really benefit, but they are benefiting? You've seen the change. I've seen it. But will they just see 4 people who aren't very good at piano yet? Marcus sat beside her on the bench. Play something. What you haven't touched these keys in weeks. You come here every day, you sit at this piano, but you never play. Why? Victoria's hands trembled. Because I'm afraid I've forgotten how, or worse, that I never really knew how in the first place. Your mother was wrong, Marcus's voice was firm. What she told you about emotion being the enemy, that was her fear, not truth. Music needs emotion. That's literally all it is. I don't know if I can unlearn 22 years of believing otherwise, then learn it alongside them. Marcus gestured toward the empty room where his students had sat. Be vulnerable with them. Show them what it looks like to start again. Victoria finally pressed a key. Middle C. The note hung in the air between them. That's one, Marcus encouraged softly. She played another. D, then E. A simple scale, halting and uncertain. By the time she reached the octave, tears were streaming down her face. Why does this hurt so much? Because you're feeling something real for the first time in 20 years. Marcus understood that pain intimately. It means you're alive. Victoria turned to him, her mask completely gone. My mother died last year. Breast cancer, quick and brutal. I thought when she died I'd feel free, but I just felt emptier. Grief doesn't follow rules. Marcus reached over and covered her hand with his. You can be angry at someone and still miss them. She never apologized. Not for any of it. Victoria's voice broke. And now she never will. Marcus pulled her into his arms, feeling her body shake with sobs she'd been holding for a year. He understood that particular weight, the grief of unresolved wounds, the anger at someone who wasn't there to face it. He held her while she cried, offering the only comfort that mattered, the presence of someone who understood that some pain didn't have solutions, just witnesses. When Victoria finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer. Thank you for what? For seeing me, not the foundation, not the money, just me. That's what the listening room is for. Marcus smiled slightly, learning to see each other. The night before the recital, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on his futon, staring at the ceiling, while Emma breathed softly in the next room. 6 weeks until they'd invited scrutiny. 6 weeks to prepare students who were still struggling with basic techniques. 6 weeks to either prove that this work mattered or watch it collapse under the weight of Richard Crane's influence. Marcus got up and made coffee, then pulled out his notebook. He'd been working on something new, a piece that captured the feeling of the past 6 weeks' struggle and progress, fear and courage, breaking and mending. He wrote until dawn, the melody emerging note by note, like light gradually filling a dark room. Emma found him at the kitchen table, head down on his arms, sleeping beside pages of music. She covered him with a blanket and went to get ready for school, understanding that her father was building something bigger than both of them, something that required his full heart. The day of the recital arrived cold and bright. Marcus woke early and dressed in his one good suit, salvaged from his Juilliard days and still fitting despite everything. Emma wore her blue dress. They ate breakfast in nervous silence, both understanding that today would define something important. The listening room filled slowly with people Marcus didn't know. Donors in expensive suits, board members clutching programs, a few journalists looking bored until the story proved interesting. And in the third row, Richard Crane, champagne flute already in hand despite the morning hour, his expression making it clear he'd come to watch a disaster. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. But beside him, Victoria's hand found his and held tight. They came to see. Her voice was steady. Now let's give them something worth seeing. The recital began. Thomas walked to the piano first, his steps measured and careful like a man navigating a minefield. The audience shifted in their seats, uncomfortable energy rippling through the room as they watched his hands shake. Marcus saw donors exchange glances, saw Crane's smirk widen with vindication. But Thomas sat down, placed those trembling fingers on the keys, and began. The piece was nothing remarkable on paper, a simple melody Thomas had written himself, 8 measures that repeated with slight variations. The notes weren't always clean. His hands betrayed him twice, stumbling over transitions that should have been easy. But something in the music transcended technique. It spoke of survival, of waking up every day when your body screamed that you couldn't, of finding beauty in the wreckage of what you used to be. When Thomas finished, silence held the room. Then his wife stood, tears streaming down her face, her applause shattering the quiet. Others followed slowly, uncertain at first, then building into something real. Thomas turned to Marcus as he left the stage, his eyes wet. I did it. You did more than that. Marcus gripped his shoulder. You showed them courage has nothing to do with steady hands. Maria went next, her 4 children sitting in the front row like tiny witnesses to their mother's transformation. She apologized before sitting down, old habit, old wound, then caught Marcus's eye. He shook his head slightly. No more apologies. Maria's piece was even simpler than Thomas's, a beginner's exercise in C major that she'd practiced until her fingers ached. But she played it with the fierce concentration of someone claiming territory that had been denied her entire life. This moment, this piano, this space where she was allowed to be more than invisible. Her youngest started clapping before she finished, enthusiastic and unrestrained. The rest of the audience joined in, and Marcus saw something shift in Maria's posture. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted. She looked at her children and smiled, really smiled, maybe for the first time they could remember. That's my mommy, the 3-year-old's voice carried through the applause. She's so pretty. David performed third, walking to the piano without preamble, without looking at the audience. His composition was 12 minutes of structured chaos patterns that shouldn't cohere but somehow did, melodies that followed mathematical precision instead of emotional logic. The audience didn't understand it. Marcus could see confusion on their faces, donors checking their phones, board members whispering. But then something happened around the 7-minute mark. David's patterns began to sync with something deeper, some universal rhythm that bypassed conscious understanding and hit straight at the brainstem. People stopped fidgeting. Phones were lowered. The music was alien but undeniably intentional, the work of a mind that processed reality through different channels and found beauty there anyway. When David finished, he stood and walked off stage without acknowledging the applause. But as he passed Marcus, his hand reached out and briefly touched Marcus's arm. Thank you for listening. Marcus felt his throat close. This boy who couldn't make eye contact, who the world had labeled broken, had just shared his truth with a room full of strangers and survived. Grace was last among the students. Evelyn helped her to the piano, whispering encouragement, terrified her mother would have one of her bad moments in front of everyone. Grace's eyes were cloudy this morning, her confusion evident as she looked around the room without recognition. "Where am I?" "You're at the recital, Mom." Evelyn's voice cracked. "You're going to play for everyone. I don't remember how." "Yes, you do. Just let your hands remember for you." Grace sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys with uncertainty that made the audience lean forward with uncomfortable pity. This was the disaster Crane had predicted, watching someone with Alzheimer's forget in real time, proving that some people were beyond help. But then Grace's hands touched the keys. And muscle memory, deeper than disease, older than the betrayals of neurons and synapses, took over. Rhapsody in Blue, Gershwin's masterpiece, note perfect and emotionally devastating. Grace played like the disease didn't exist, like the 40 years of teaching hadn't been erased, like she was exactly who she'd always been. Her hands moved with authority and grace, the technical precision of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering this exact thing. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't a struggling beginner. This was a master trapped in a failing body, speaking through the only language her disease couldn't steal. Marcus watched faces transform, pity becoming awe, skepticism becoming wonder. When Grace finished, she looked up with confusion returning to her eyes. "Did I play something?" "Yes, Mom." Evelyn was openly weeping now. "You played beautifully." "Oh." Grace smiled vaguely. "That's nice." The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Even Richard Crane was on his feet, his expression complicated by emotions he clearly didn't want to feel. Marcus saw him wipe his eyes with the back of his hand before catching himself and sitting down abruptly. Victoria appeared at Marcus's side, her hand finding his. That was extraordinary. That was truth. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off Grace, being led gently off stage by her daughter. That's what happens when we stop trying to fix people and just let them be who they are. The room buzzed with conversation during the brief intermission. Marcus heard donors talking animatedly, board members reconsidering their positions. But he also heard skepticism voices questioning whether 4 successful performances proved anything systemic, whether this was sustainable or just lucky. Crane's voice cut through it all, quite moving. His tone dripped with condescension as he addressed a cluster of board members. But let's not confuse sentiment with substance. These people are still struggling, still broken. One recital doesn't change that. Victoria moved toward him, fury in her eyes, but Marcus caught her arm. "Let me." He crossed to where Crane stood, conscious of everyone watching, of Emma in her corner, with her sketchbook of his students who had just poured their hearts out for strangers. "You're right," Marcus's voice was calm. "They are struggling. So am I. So is everyone in this room if they're honest. The question isn't whether we struggle. It's whether we let that struggle isolate us or connect us." Crane's lips curled. Very poetic janitor. "But poetry doesn't pay bills or change lives." "You're wrong about that." Marcus felt 9 years of silence finding voice. Poetry is exactly what changes lives. Music is poetry. Teaching someone their voice matters is poetry. Showing people they're seen, that's the most powerful poetry there is. You really believe this matters? That teaching broken people to play mediocre piano is worth the foundation's resources? I believe that calling people broken says more about you than them. Marcus held Crane's gaze. "And I believe that measuring worth by technical skill instead of human courage means you've forgotten what music is actually for." Crane's face flushed. His mouth opened to respond, but nothing came. Around them, the room had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation between the critic who destroyed careers and the janitor who refused to stay invisible. Finally, Crane turned away. "We'll see how you feel when reality sets in. When the novelty wears off and you're left with nothing but people who can't actually perform." Marcus let him walk away. There was no winning with men like Crane, you could only refuse to lose. But Victoria had a different plan. She climbed the stage steps and took the microphone, her CEO persona fully engaged. "Thank you all for coming." Her voice carried authority that silenced remaining conversations. "What you've witnessed today is the beginning of something important. Not charity, not pity, just recognition that talent and worth exist in places we've been trained not to look." She gestured toward where Marcus stood. "6 months ago, I watched this man get humiliated at a gala for daring to speak about something he knew. And in that moment of humiliation, he reminded me what I'd lost by playing it safe, by measuring success in metrics instead of meaning. Victoria's voice softened but lost none of its power. The listening room isn't about creating professional musicians. It's about creating space for people to remember they're human, that they contain beauty, that their struggles don't disqualify them from mattering. Crane shifted in his seat, uncomfortable being indirectly addressed. So yes, Victoria looked directly at him now. These students are struggling. They're not polished. They're not ready for Carnegie Hall. But they're brave. And bravery, real bravery, the kind that makes you show up when every instinct screams to hide, that's what music was always supposed to celebrate. The room erupted in applause. Marcus saw donors nodding, board members wiping eyes. Even the journalists were paying attention, now scribbling notes with newfound interest. And now, Victoria's eyes found Marcus. The founder of the listening room has something to share. A piece 9 years in the making. Please welcome Marcus Webb. The applause built as Marcus walked to the stage. His heart hammered against his ribs. Emma was watching from her corner, her face glowing with pride and nervousness. His students sat together in a cluster, their expressions urging him forward. Marcus sat at the piano and adjusted the microphone. 6 months ago, his voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. I was a janitor who had spent 9 years hiding from the thing I loved most. My wife died giving birth to our daughter, and when she died, I buried music with her because playing felt like betrayal. He looked at Emma. But my daughter saved me. She found letters her mother had written before she died. Letters that told me not to give up. That said music was my gift, and I shouldn't bury it. Marcus turned to face the piano. Tonight I'm going to play something I started the week before my daughter was born. Something I couldn't finish until now because grief had convinced me that moving forward meant leaving Rachel behind. His fingers found the keys. This is called Emma's Lullaby, and it's for everyone who's ever lost something precious and thought they'd never find beauty again. The opening measures were gentle, a parent humming to a sleeping child, warmth and safety and uncomplicated love. Marcus let himself feel Rachel's presence in the melody, the way she used to rest her hand on his shoulder, while he played, the way she'd close her eyes and smile, like the music was a language only they understood. But then the piece shifted. The harmonies darkened, minor chords creeping in like shadows at sunset. This was the night Rachel died, the moment the doctor said there were complications, the eternal seconds, while they tried to save her and failed. Marcus's hands moved through the pain, not avoiding it, but giving it voice, letting the audience hear what words couldn't capture. In the third movement, the melody fragmented, disconnected phrases that tried to find each other and couldn't, the musical equivalent of a man drowning in grief while holding a newborn who needed him to be whole. Marcus felt tears on his face but kept playing, trusting the music to hold what he couldn't. Then Emma's theme emerged. Tentative at first, a single line of melody that wove through the darkness like light through cracks. This was his daughter learning to walk, to talk, to draw pictures that transformed ugly things into beauty. This was 9 years of survival, becoming finally the beginning of life. The final section brought everything together. Rachel's original theme and Emma's new one intertwining in counterpoint that spoke of loss and love existing simultaneously, of carrying the dead forward without being crushed by their weight. Marcus played through blurred vision, his whole body engaged in translating 9 years of silence into sound. The final chord resolved to major, not triumphant, just peaceful. The kind of peace that comes after storms when you realize you're still standing and that standing is enough. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys. The silence stretched, absolute and electric. Then Emma ran from her corner, climbed the stage steps, and threw her arms around him. That was for me. Her voice was muffled against his chest. You wrote that for me, for you, for your mother. Marcus held her tight. For everyone who thinks healing is linear, when it's really just learning to carry things differently. The applause started building like a wave. People stood, donors, board members, even the journalists. The sound filled the chapel, rattled. The windows shook the rafters. Marcus held his daughter and let the recognition wash over him, still not quite believing that being seen could feel like this. Victoria joined them on stage, tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide them. She couldn't find words. That was everything. But Marcus was looking past the applause to where Richard Crane sat motionless. The critic's face had transformed, the smirk gone, the superiority stripped away. What remained looked almost like grief, like a man confronting something he'd spent years denying. Their eyes met. Crane stood abruptly and walked out. The audience mingled afterward, donors writing checks, board members discussing expansion. Marcus accepted congratulations with the awkward grace of someone unaccustomed to praise. His students surrounded him, their presence more valuable than any donor contribution. You showed us how. Thomas's voice was thick. How to turn pain into something people can witness. I just played the truth. Marcus looked at each of them. You all did the same thing. That's what this place is for. Victoria was deep in conversation with the board members when her assistant approached Marcus. Someone's here to see you, outside. Marcus excused himself and walked to the entrance. Richard Crane stood on the sidewalk holding a small bouquet of flowers like a man who'd forgotten how to apologize and was trying to relearn. Mr. Crane, Marcus, Crane's voice had lost its edge. He stopped started again. I've been thinking about what you said, about measuring worth by technical skill instead of courage. Marcus waited. I spent 40 years in this industry. Crane stared at the flowers in his hands. 40 years reviewing performances, judging competitions, deciding who deserves success. And I convinced myself I was serving art, maintaining standards, protecting excellence from mediocrity. The words came slowly, painful as surgery. But watching your students tonight, watching that woman with Alzheimer's play Gershwin, hearing you play that lullaby, I realized I've been measuring the wrong things. That music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. Marcus finished quietly. It's about truth. Yes. Crane looked up, his eyes raw. These are for you, a peace offering, though I don't expect you to accept it. What I said at the gala, what I've been saying since. I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost him something vital. Marcus saw a man who had built his identity on judgment, confronting the possibility that his entire worldview was flawed. Would you like to stay? Marcus gestured toward the chapel. We're just talking, sharing stories. You are welcome to listen. Crane's eyes widened. After everything I said, everything I tried to destroy, you'd want me here. The listening room is for everyone. Marcus took the flowers, even critics learning to hear differently. A small smile crossed Crane's face. I'd like that, very much. They returned inside together. Marcus watched Crane settle into a chair near the back, listening to conversations between students and donors, his expression suggesting he was hearing things for the first time, despite decades in the music world. That was kind. Victoria appeared at Marcus's elbow, letting him stay. Hurt people hurt people. Marcus had learned that from Emma from his own journey. But they can also heal if someone gives them space to. The evening wound down. Students left with their families, donors departed with checks written, and consciences momentarily salved. Eventually, only Marcus, Victoria, Emma, and the cleanup crew remained. Come here. Victoria took Marcus's hand and led him back to the piano. I want to try something. She sat on the bench and gestured for him to join. For weeks I've been coming here, sitting at this piano, but never playing because I was afraid. Afraid I'd forgotten how. Afraid my mother was right that I was never good enough. But tonight, watching your students. Victoria's hands trembled over the keys. I think I'm ready to try again. What do you want to play, Emma's lullaby? The part you just performed. Will you teach me? Marcus felt something warm expand in his chest. I'd be honored. They spent the next hour working through the piece together, Victoria's fingers gradually remembering patterns they'd abandoned decades ago. She stumbled, got frustrated, had to start over multiple times. But she didn't stop, didn't retreat into the safety of giving up. When she finally played through the opening section without major mistakes, Victoria looked at Marcus with wonder. I did it. You did. Marcus covered her hand with his. And tomorrow you'll do more. Tomorrow, Victoria repeated the word like it held promise. I like the sound of that. Emma appeared beside them, yawning widely. Dad, are we going home soon? Yeah, sweetheart. Marcus stood and stretched. It's been a long day. A good day, though. Emma looked between Marcus and Victoria with an expression far too knowing for 9 years old. Right, the best. Marcus pulled her into a hug. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That's what family does. The word hung in the air, family. Marcus looked at Victoria, saw the same question in her eyes. Were they becoming that 3 damaged people finding safety in shared wounds? Time would answer. For now, there was just this moment of possibility. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the original chapel now called the Listening Room North, watching volunteers set up for the anniversary celebration. 4 additional locations had opened across the city, each one serving populations that traditional music programs ignored. Former students had become teachers. Donors had become believers. Even Richard Crane had written a column praising the initiative, shocking everyone who knew his history. Thomas now taught classes for veterans, showing them that trembling hands could still make beauty. Maria had started a program for foster children, giving them the things she'd never had permission to claim something lovely. David was at Juilliard on a full scholarship, his compositions garnering attention for their innovation. Grace had passed peacefully in her sleep 6 months ago, but Evelyn had donated money to create a scholarship in her mother's name for students fighting memory loss. And Victoria. Victoria had stepped back from her CEO role to focus entirely on the foundation's education programs. She played piano every day now, not for audiences, but for herself. She and Marcus had been together for 8 months, building something steady and real, something that didn't rush because it was built on foundations that could actually hold. Emma was 10 now, still drawing everything she saw. Her latest series, Portraits of Listening Room Students, was being exhibited at a gallery in Chelsea. The art critics called her work haunting and hopeful, capturing transformation in graphite and paper. Marcus walked to the piano, the same one he'd polished at the Gala 18 months ago. He carried Rachel's letters, worn from being read and reread. The final letter was the one he saved for moments when he needed to remember why he kept going. He unfolded it carefully, the paper soft as cloth from handling. My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, you've survived. That alone is enough. But I hope you've done more than survive. I hope you've lived. I hope you've played music again. I hope you've let someone see you clearly. I hope you've shown Emma that loss doesn't have to be the end, that sometimes the most beautiful songs come from the deepest pain. I'll always love you. But love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go. It's about trusting that what we had was real, and what comes next can be real too. Play for me, Marcus. Play for Emma. Play for everyone who's forgotten that beauty is still possible. And then keep playing until your hands give out, until your heart gives out, until there's nothing left but the music and the memory of what we had together. I'll be listening, always. Rachel. Marcus folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. Then he sat at the piano and began to play. Not the lullaby this time, but something new. A piece about resurrection, about choosing life over survival, about the courage it took to be visible when invisibility felt safer. The music filled the empty chapel, floating out through open windows into the city beyond. Somewhere Marcus knew Rachel was listening, not with sadness, but with joy, because the man she loved had finally found his way home. Victoria entered quietly, Emma beside her. They sat together, the three of them, listening as Marcus played. Not an audience, just family. Found family built from grief and hope, and the stubborn insistence that broken things could still be beautiful. When Marcus finished, he didn't turn around immediately. He sat with his hands on the keys, feeling the residual vibration in the wood, the way music never really stopped. It just transformed into memory, and then memory into action, and action into life lived fully instead of survived barely. That was new. Victoria's voice was soft. What's it called? Marcus thought for a moment. The Crossing. Like crossing the street, Emma's voice held understanding beyond her years. Like that. Marcus finally turned to face them. Like deciding that being seen is worth the risk of being hurt. Emma came to the piano and climbed onto the bench beside him. Play it again. I want to draw it. Marcus smiled. Only if Victoria plays it with me. Victoria's eyes widened. I'm not ready for something that complex. You're ready for trying. That's all this place ever asked. She crossed to the piano, sitting on Marcus's other side. Emma in the middle, drawing, while her parents, and they were her parents now, not by blood but by choice, played together. The music was imperfect, Victoria stumbling over passages she hadn't mastered yet. But the imperfection was the point. They were building something real, and real things were always messy before they became beautiful. Through the window, Marcus saw Richard Crane approaching the chapel, walking with less certainty than he used to, but more honesty. He'd become a regular volunteer teaching music history and slowly, painfully learning that judgment was easier than compassion. But compassion changed more. Thomas and Maria arrived together, both of them teachers now, both of them carrying the weight of their transformations with quiet pride. David's music played on someone's phone as they entered his compositions, finding audiences who appreciated beauty that didn't follow traditional rules. The listening room had grown from 4 students to 400, from one chapel to 5 locations, from a desperate idea into a movement that reminded people that art wasn't about perfection, it was about permission. Permission to struggle, permission to be seen, permission to believe that your voice mattered even when the world insisted it didn't. Marcus played until his hands ached. Until the sunset painted the chapel windows golden orange. Until Emma had filled 3 pages of her sketchbook and Victoria had started crying for reasons she didn't fully understand, but didn't need to explain. When they finally stopped, the silence felt full instead of empty, charged with possibility instead of weighted with grief. Dad, Emma's voice broke the quiet. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mom hears us? Really, Marcus thought about Rachel's letters about music that transcended death, about how love changed forms but never fully disappeared. I know she does. Not with ears, but with whatever part of us keeps existing after everything else stops. She hears us, and she's proud. How do you know? Because I can feel it. Every time I play, every time you draw, every time we choose to make something beautiful instead of just surviving. She's there. Emma nodded, satisfied. Good. I want her to know we're okay now. We're more than okay. Marcus pulled both his girls close, Emma and Victoria, his found family, his proof that endings could become beginnings, if you were brave enough to keep walking. We're alive. Outside the city hummed with its endless noise. Inside, 3 people sat at a piano in a chapel that used to be empty and now overflowed with meaning. The music had stopped, but its echo remained pressing against the walls, seeping into the floorboards, becoming part of the building's memory. Marcus Webb had been invisible for 9 years, had believed that survival was the same as success, that making himself small would somehow make the grief smaller too. But grief didn't shrink from avoidance. It only transformed when acknowledged, when given voice, when turned into something that could be shared. He wasn't invisible anymore, wasn't just surviving. He was teaching broken people that they weren't broken, was showing them that struggle didn't disqualify them from beauty, was building a place where listening mattered more than performing, where truth mattered more than technique, where being seen was both terrifying and necessary. The listening room would keep growing. More students would come, each carrying their own wounds, each needing permission to believe they deserved beauty. Marcus would keep teaching, keep playing, keep reminding them that music was older than words and deeper than wounds and stronger than the voices insisting they should stay quiet. Rachel's letters would stay in his pocket, carried everywhere like promises he was finally keeping. Emma would keep drawing, capturing transformation in graphite and paper. Victoria would keep learning to play, without fear, to create without judgment, to love without armor. And somewhere in whatever space existed beyond endings, Rachel was listening. Not with sadness, but with joy. Because the man she loved had finally remembered what she tried to tell him before she died, that the music never dies, it just waits for someone brave enough to wake it up. Marcus stood and closed the piano's fallboard gently, reverently. Tomorrow there would be more students, more challenges, more people needing proof that their voices had mattered. But tonight there was just this 3 people in a chapel built from broken things, holding each other in the fading light, alive and seen, and finally beautifully home.